Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's edition of Fake Accents Unite. I'm joined this evening by the ever-affable Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Why do you sound so much more energetic when you say hello compared to when you talk to us prior to the stream?
Oh, it's all for the audience, you know. I've got to get myself in the zone, pump myself up with a good intro.
It's all pretense, isn't it?
Basically, you know. But what can I
Moving
say?
on. Yes, moving on.
I'm also joined by Binary Surfer, who many know from his general fame across Academic Agents channel, across Sargon's channel, talking about the many things around. So thank you very much for joining me this evening, Binary.
No worries. And yeah, off air, you sound something like Eeyore from Wind in the Willows. Not Wind in the Willows.
It's from Winnie the Pooh, you mean?
Winnie the Pooh, thank you.
It's
been a long day.
Isn't the more apt comparison, isn't it Marvin the Robot?
Oh, God, we're not going to go back to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, are we? I mean, for goodness sake.
Could be worse. You could sound like a sparkling pony thing.
Yeah, but it is remarkable, isn't it, how he goes from Marvin the Robot to American TV show host, you know?
Well, you know how Ben...
I mean, the fact that I have to put up with, hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
That's obvious. Could you just say, I'd buy that for $1?
I'd buy that for $1. You know how
even British gets that pop culture reference.
You know how was it when I was in the military? One of my nicknames was Eeyore. It just happened to, just one of those things.
Just one of those wild coincidences, you mean?
Yes, it's almost as if my voice kind of perpetuates its own sort of misery, isn't it? But there we go. Good evening, everybody in the chat. Let's just see who we got this evening. We've got Pterrodax, Object of Hate, Dominic, all the old favourites. I'm always somewhat pleased that Dominic joins us, aren't you, Britisher?
Well, yes, because otherwise I would have to put up with you on my own.
Somewhat on your own, anyway.
Well, you know, open goal. What can I say?
No. And we already have a couple of super chats that are coming in. So Tim Cornish, generous as always, with $10 donation, saying nationalism, the other N-word. Obviously, by putting N-word in his super chat, that's going straight to charity, and none of it will come to me. But thank you very much, sir. And Lil Aotio Ro, I'm butchering that, has donated from New Zealand, $5 New Zealand. Thank you very much. First donation. Saying Binary Surfer needs to move his mic back further from his mouth. His breath keeps blowing on it too loud, or maybe turn his gain down. And you can tell how annoying that this clearly was because they paid to say it to us. But
it's slightly better now. I've just turned the fan off that was pointing at my face. I might have overheated this room slightly.
That does. Are you in a hot box at the moment that you need to?
My study is quite small, and I've been in here working from home all day, so my computer has heated it quite nicely.
So what you're saying is you're the only YouTuber known to be broadcasting from a sauna,
basically.
Yeah. Don't act like you work for a living, Binary. But so obviously lots to talk about this week in terms of the political space. I thought as Binary has brought some interesting stuff from across the pond, we'd start there. Why don't you give us an introduction to that?
So which tweet have you got up?
I have. If I share my screen, just like so, there we go. If it'll allow me to. It's just lagging a little bit here. Just bear with me. Will you cancel that? Will you share it? It's not allowing me to share my screen at all, which is slightly bizarre. Just bear with.
Is this because we're in post Hangout?
Oh, probably. For anyone who's unaware, Google Hangouts has been discontinued from... there we go. That should be possible now. Google has discontinued its
we're just waiting for sort of Alexa's voice to come in and say this live stream will self-destruct in 3, 2, 1.
I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that.
Oh, I watched that the other day actually for like the second time, because the first time it made absolutely no sense, and the second time round it made absolutely no sense. But I kind of understand it's supposed to be a thematic and sort of metaphorical masterpiece, but I have to say I wasn't particularly entertained, even though the themes were perhaps I guess, like interesting constructs to get around. Apparently, according to the history of 2001: A Space Odyssey, it was like the film where the most people walked out of it at the intermission period. At the time, it was like the film most people had walked out of. Anyway, popular culture aside, here we have a tweet. Can you see it all right?
I can see about 437, and then it becomes a blur in the distance.
400 and what?
Yeah, so the view, if you look at your live stream, is of something that is infinite hall of mirrors.
Oh, I see, like that. Okay, interesting. Let me try. Will this work? There we go.
Yes, that worked.
There we are. Right. I don't know why it's.
I wonder how many viewers, once I said that, were frantically trying to count how many times they could see the same representation.
I have no idea. It's just like it was just you, Britisher. Everyone else was just quite happy staring into oblivion. Right, so woke Lindsey Graham drops the hammer, calls for new special counsel to investigate the FBI, the Department of Justice, I assume the DOJ is, Hillary Clinton, Andrew McCabe, James Comey, Fusion GPS, James Clapper, John Brennan, the fake Trump dossier, the FISA warrant process, and anyone who wanted to spy on the Trump campaign.
Yep, and Graham was really calm and milquetoast until maybe, well, whenever Kavanaugh happened, and then just something snapped in him.
He's just completely gone off the wall, hasn't he? I do believe if you guys will be quiet for a second, we can play this short excerpt. And if I take my headphones out, we should be able to hear the volume at least. Let's try this.
General Bard, what does he say?
Well, what I want to do is see if he'll appoint a special counsel. I fully realize that the oversight role of the committee is legitimate, but we're Republicans, they're Democrats. I'd like to find somebody like a Mr. Mueller that could look into what happened with the FISA warrant, what happened with the counterintelligence investigation. Am I right to be concerned? Seems pretty bad on its face, but somebody like a Mr. Mueller to look at that so that if nobody else, those who believe that the FBI and the Department of Justice were playing politics, that they wanted Clinton to win and Trump to lose, that somebody can satisfy them, that was looked at. There's some people are never going to accept the Mueller report, what I say or what Mr. Barr does. But by any reasonable standard, Mr. Mueller thoroughly investigated the Trump campaign. You cannot say that about the other side of the story. And what I hope Mr. Barr will do is understand, for the country's sake, appoint somebody outside the current system to look into these allegations, somebody we all trust, and let them do what Mr. Mueller did.
You were on the golf course. You were on the golf course yesterday with the president.
Yeah.
Were you there when he got the news?
No, I was at the waiting to.
Right, there we go.
So he wants someone a bit like Mr. Mueller, who is reliable and trustworthy and possibly not too partisan. I've heard there's some lawyer who has a vacancy right now. What's his name? Cohen.
And Avenatti, if you heard the news today.
Oh, yes, indeed, of course, he too. Yes. And I think he might also be in some need of money.
Creepy porn lawyer, for those of you who don't know who we're talking about.
What? Sorry, say again?
He's known as creepy porn lawyer, a bit better.
Oh, Avenatti or Graham?
Avenatti. Graham, as far as I can tell, is a very upstanding family man type.
I was going to say, as
far as I can tell, Graham is the most toast of like conventional politicians until Kavanaugh. He just sort of something made him snap, and since then he's just been giving absolutely no fucks. I'm loving it.
I believe, yes, I do remember listening to, what was it, a rather fiery speech he gave around the Kavanaugh situation about like dragging his name through the mud. And since then, he just seems to be like, I can get away with this. I can actually be a little bit sort of actually aggressive with my own views.
I have a suspicion he's just realized that the game is now one of fighting to kill rather than fighting to wound like it was before.
Indeed. the upstanding, effeminate family man. So it's just like, I really can't tell. Like when, well, there are some American accents that are particularly effeminate, but there you go. So just in general, he's asking to, from what I'm gathering from this, he's like investigating the other side now that has the Trump Russia collusion thing completely fallen through at the moment? I believe it has. It's
dead for all intents and purposes. They're still trying to keep the narrative alive, but they've basically gone from didn't collude with what have they gone from? They've gone from it's going to prove he colluded with Russia to it can't prove he didn't.
Well, they're not actually. I think he was pretty much cleared when it comes to Russian collusion. I think what they're looking at now, or what they're desperately clinging to now, is the fact that Mueller could not rule out obstruction. Because
that's trying to prove a negative, and it's like prove you didn't.
Yeah. I mean, usually what trips up politicians is the cover up, the attempt to obstruct anyone from finding out that they've done something.
Yeah, same with Nixon, the most famous example, isn't it?
Yeah. So immediately that's what they're now clinging to, as in sort of, well, he hasn't been able to rule out that this is what's happened. And you just go, well, yeah, I mean, as you said, it's proving a negative. And that will now be their narrative. They will try and fudge this, as in sort of, well, this is undecided merely due to lack of evidence. There are still two ways you can see this, as opposed to just, it was wrong. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah. And there was no further comment.
Yeah, I'm absolutely loving this. Since Sunday night, it's just been hilarity all around. The only thing that's still winding me up is Brexit, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
Oh,
the American side of things has been nothing but hilarity.
So there we
go.
The
funny thing is they can't even push back against Graham now. Any attempt to push back looks deeply hypocritical because they've just indulged a 2-year witch hunt.
So there you go. That's what's going on across the pond. Thanks for bringing that binary. But going back to obviously the main topic of the evening, it's going to be Brexit, isn't it? And this in particular, I want to start with, if again it'll allow me to share this properly. Perhaps we could have a look at this, which seems to have been making the rounds all on its own. This is a petition that crashed the Parliament's petition website on last Wednesday, I think it was, which has the most signed petition in history, funnily enough, given that it's such a divisive issue. And the reason why this has any relevance at all, because the Remainers are crowing as if this means something. I mean, it means that there is still a significant portion of the UK who wish to remain in the European Union. Who would have guessed it? But
it also means that the website doesn't actually validate emails. You can use the same one several times, as someone proved the other day.
I believe a number of these signatures are from prominent Leavers who decided that they were going to use names like Santa Claus.
Yes, I think that's all Katie Hopkins signing up as Romani Muck Ramon Face.
Romani McRamone face, and obviously not just using different names, but using the same email address with a different name on each. So it's not even that people are setting up, say, 10-minute email accounts and can sign up to this one. It's that you could just submit anything with sort of 3-letter names, and it could be counted on the signature count. A lot of Leavers have pointed out that a lot of the votes appear to be coming from abroad, but this doesn't really hold water to me because I can well believe that some crazy Remainers, like or not crazy Remainers, just a lot of Remainers who want to stay in the European Union would sign this. There's also the case of all the expats who live abroad who couldn't vote in the Remain referendum. Couldn't vote in the EU referendum, sorry, who, because they've passed their 15-year marker of living abroad, who are signing this by the looks of things as kind of like here's my vote actually being counted, and if you had counted it in the original referendum, perhaps we wouldn't be where we are now, sort of thing. So I don't think that there's bots particularly flowing into this one. I also think that they are obviously about 9 million signatures off anyone really caring. Do you know what I mean? in the sense of like a petition being a non-binding show of preference,
Well, I mean, they're always telling us that the actual referendum was non-binding.
Of course.
I find it interesting that they insist that the initial referendum was non-binding, and yet they desperately want another non-binding referendum.
Well, they don't. They want this new one to be binding. They also want it to involve things like, I believe, is it the Swiss or the Swedes? They have a system where they're like, unless it's basically a 2/3 majority.
It's the Swiss.
It's the Swiss, yeah. Unless it's a 2/3
They
majority.
have referenda for fucking everything. They have like 2 a year or something stupid all the time.
Yeah, they do. I mean, they're small enough to get away with it, really. So it doesn't bother me. If it works for them, it works for them. But it's like, that's what they want. They were like, unless it's the popular will of 2/3 of the people, because they know that as things currently stand, that would never pass. A Leave vote would never pass with that kind of impetus on it. And of course, it completely places all the power in their hands, because it's like, unless you get 2/3 to leave, we're not leaving. But it's like, but what if you don't get 2/3 to remain? We don't remain. It's like there is no middle ground here between, in that middle third, to allow that. So it's very strange. It's very strange.
Well, as I was saying before we came on air, as far as I'm concerned, they would almost have to be a price to pay, as far as I'm concerned. As in, sort of, so you want another referendum within the space of 3 years. You want another referendum. So what if you lose this referendum? Can you then just ask for another? Or should we basically say, if you lose this referendum, then each person who voted Remain and was on the losing side owes the state $2,000, which can then be distributed among the others? It's just, I mean, like this kind of joy of being able to say, oh, we want another referendum. Why? Well, effectively because you lost. That's why you want another referendum. And I'll say, I'm saying this as someone who voted Remain at the time, and I am quite disgusted at this, at this attitude, that one, from day one of having lost, one has sought to sabotage this.
It's also really interesting. Like, I work and I spend a lot of time in the university environment, and the number of students who will come up to me and they'll go, look, we're coming towards the Brexit thing now. Like, there are a couple of really staunch Remainers who are just really pro-EU nationalist sort of style thing. But there's a lot of people who just have absolutely no idea what's going on. And you sit down and you explain things to them, and then they go, it's like that, is it? It's that simple in regards of the actual process. And you explain things like, the sovereignty issue, which is often not explained to Remainers. They just get, I had to make a complaint actually against one of my lecturers the other day for saying that all Leave voters were xenophobic. That was the primary reason underpinning all the Leave votes, which I wasn't very happy with, and now he's not very happy with me. He said something along the lines of, I said to him, "Oh, that was a good lecture the other day," and he said, "You think that, but it's actually just my my sneaky way of perpetuating my ideological war against you." So
it's interesting because what is it? Clive Lewis MP had a tweet out today, which was sort of an angry, I'm conflating nothing. Leave was an inherently right-wing, deregulatory, and racist project.
Oh yeah, like the most common argument we see these days is just we were fed a lie. People didn't know what they were voting for, and you
forget that 70% of Leave voters were Labour or something like that.
Well, as I say, that's what I point out. Basically, this was the tweet I sent to him. I said, in reply to his, I said, really, Mr. Mr. Lewis, Stoke and Sunderland are right-wing heartlands, are they? Since when? So given that these are long-standing Labour strongholds, why are they so racist, according to your judgment? Are Labour voters racist? Or do you maybe want to reconsider this? To which there so far has not been a reply.
You should have linked me that tweet, British. I would have replied, no, just Labour Party members.
Ooh.
I in the same
No, but I
camp
mean,
as Graham
you
now
know,
on Twitter. I just like
Stoke,
baiting people.
Stoke and Sunderland are pretty much, as Labour as you can get.
Yeah, Stoke had 16,000 majority or something stupid. Or was it Sunderland? One of the two had.
And basically they are. I think Stoke is the constituency. It's the place that voted most strongly in favour of Brexit.
Mm.
And you look at that and you say, okay, so how does this whole right-wing conspiracy thing work then? So these are Labour heartlands, and they're voting for Brexit. And there seems to be, they kind of put these statements out there, and whenever they're questioned, the answer is just nothing, because there is absolutely no way of actually explaining this.
It's almost as if, well, of course,
anymore. Go on.
What you do is you reject that, especially if you're someone like Anna Soubry, who I believe her constituency is primarily Leave, and then she's just like, yeah, so I'm a Remainer, so looks like I'm going to represent the minor. Like they seem to be getting into like this kind of, but we need to promote minority representation. So obviously, Remainers being minority, they need to be given special, special privileges to get over this racist majority.
I think we are seeing something happening whereby there seems to be a major problem as far as sort of the disconnect between the populace and the two main parties are concerned. I mean, I think it's fair to say that the same kind of crisis has befallen smaller parties, but when it comes to Labour and the Tories, there is now a massive disconnect with the parties and the populace. Now, what the parties are hoping for is that they can get Brexit behind them and then can return to business as normal. But
yeah,
I'm not quite sure that that's necessarily going to work, because there has now been a massive sort of wedge being driven between the politicians and the people.
I have a suspicion it's more about having shown the gap that there are no socially conservative parties left, effectively, outside of perhaps UKIP, maybe. That they're all socially liberal, and then you range slightly on fiscal conservatism. I don't think... I think that's what the public has kind of been awakened to with this. So the Conservatives are not really conservative, and Labour are not really Labour. They're both occupying the same relatively centrepiece on social grounds.
I mean, you say that, but then I think a lot of people just look at it as who's shafting us at the moment, right? And it doesn't really matter if Labour were in or if the Conservatives were in. It's just like the Conservatives have a policy. It's called austerity. It's been poorly implemented, let's say. It doesn't appear to have done much to impact the deficit. And therefore, we've seen a decline in local services, and we can point the finger and go, all of our problems in life are currently caused by them. They're awful people, evil bastards. At the same time, you've got the Labour lot who are going, oh, we can provide all these services again. And then you get this kind of bizarre thing where people are going, don't particularly want to pay more tax. Other people going, I'm never paid tax and I'm never going to, so I may as well vote for them. And not to mention all the identity politics stuff in general. So, but it doesn't mean that when Labour were in, there weren't think about Blair's government, right? Like when people... now they're sort of seen as sort of Tory light anyway, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, where they just go, oh, they shafted us as well. And realistically, if Corbyn's government does get in 5 years' time, it's going to be a case of the Labour government are shafting us again. Like that's just the way it is. And at the moment, I just think it's people are already disillusioned with politics. They have been really, since with this kind of new wave of Labour and the Tories from probably about 2003-ish, just because of the whole fiasco surrounding the Iraq War, even for then.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I think what makes this different is that we have normally it's politics is very much about debating the length of a piece of string, because there are no definites. The only definites there are is what representation there is in Parliament. But this time round, we had the expressed will of the populace, and you can now see how Parliament is unable to represent the expressed will of the populace. And, that they simply can't bring themselves to do what the people actually want them to do. That is rather telling. And I think we have never had a situation like that before. So in a way, the fact that we sort of almost accidentally stumbled into this referendum has shown there to be something foul in the state of Denmark, if you know what I mean.
I think there's something also about the level of contempt on display, Anna Soubry being the most
yes, definitely.
So I met up by chance with some people on the weekend and found out they had actually met Anna Soubry during a visit to the House of Commons. And they basically described her as someone who would look down on you no matter who you were. She's
funnily enough,
a human being.
Funnily enough, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
The look that they gave these people, despite being relatively smartly dressed, just because they were stood in the lobby of the House of Commons on this tour, was, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah, it just seems to, as I say, it's kind of like ever more so in the case of, I suppose, if you're a politician at this point, you must be a bit like the Brexit referendum must have thrown you a bit, right? Because you live in your echo chamber of very pro-EU anyway, in general, and the Brexiteers are quite a bit smaller. Most of them are silent. I mean, when I was talking to Peter Hitchens, the biggest thing he was like was all of the people he knew in politics who basically came out of the woodwork. I mean, he was very cynical. He was like, "You don't really believe this," kind of thing, but that's just him. But the general case of like people, when they are able to, I guess, what's the word, separate themselves from party affiliation just for a moment, the number of people who actually express what they actually believe is
I think we have to concede, don't we, Binary, that he's won in the name drop top trumps here. I don't think you've ever spoken to Peter Hitchens, have you?
I have not.
No, so I think you've won that particular round. Not so obvious.
It wasn't supposed to be a humble brag. I was just trying to highlight my point. For goodness sake. But by the way, at the beginning of the month, just as an aside, did you see this from Guy Verhofstadt, which was his new pronouncement to create a single Euro-African economic area? It's like, we need to, the UK is going, right? We do need to claw back some of that potential revenue that we may be.
I see a tweet by Verhofstadt, I just hear in my head that hot fuzz thing, the greater good.
The greater good.
Well, in all fairness, I don't think he was really arguing that they should be joining into some kind of political union.
But he was expanding the single market, wasn't it?
Yes, but this is just the bizarre thing that internally within the European Union, it is argued that anybody who is in the same market must begin tax harmonization and all sorts of things, because otherwise the single market can't work. And then at the same time, Guy Verhofstadt goes out into the wider world and says, "Oh, well, we can also have a single market with Africa." Now, those things are completely contradictory, and yet nobody seems to point it out.
Verhofstadt wants access to the pretty rich mineral resources of the continent, Europe not having a huge amount in comparison. It's clearly about mineral resources and access to in-the-ground wealth, because Europe, it doesn't have a huge amount of that, nor will it ever, because of what it's sat on, except for maybe some of the eastern states if it expands a bit further.
So what you're saying is that Guy Verhofstadt wants to colonize Africa 2.0.
Yes, unironically wants to colonize Africa.
Well, then again, perhaps if we put him under sufficient pressure, we can turn him into a diamond.
Whenever I see him, I just think, "Oh, Elton John's let himself go a bit, hasn't he?" Do you know what I mean? I just and whenever I see one of his speeches just sort of screaming about more powers devolved to the European Union, I'm just reminded of just like how nuts this will all appear if he gets his way in, say, 40 years.
It's a brilliant Photoshop of someone photoshopping his face onto the Emperor Palpatine, going unlimited power.
Well, actually, I rather see him in the guise of. I know people will now immediately say, "Oh well, there he goes," comparing him to Hitler. It's not Hitler. I see him in the guise of
a Roman emperor.
No, Mr. Hinkle. For anybody who's seen The Great Dictator, Charlie Chaplin's Great Dictator.
29 minutes until the Romans were mentioned, just for reference.
Where he's people say I want war, I want this, I want the other. All I want is peace. No, hang on. I'm confusing my references here, aren't I? I think that's actually from Springtime for Hitler, from the producers, isn't it? All I want is peace. A little piece of France, a little piece of Denmark, a little piece of Austria.
I remember that.
That's fantastic. It's just like, but it's amazing as well, like this kind of like peace through unification thing as well. Do you know what I mean? Like where it's kind of, I mean, it's always been
if we're all members of the Borg, then we won't fight each other.
Yeah, well, it's always been like the German plan anyway, hasn't it? Or just in general, every time they've tried it on. And seeing as they control most of the European Union, I don't see why that kind of sentiment wouldn't persist, if only through economic means rather than military strength.
Well, when it comes to unification, I sort of, trying to bring the continent of Europe together, I see that as something perfectly laudable. I understand the idea behind it. But how long has it taken us to be as we are? And then how quickly do you try to overcome that? And that's always that has been something I can honestly say I was already complaining over 25 years ago, when they have their big Maastricht Treaty signing or something, the Lisbon Treaty or whichever, and the next day they're all back negotiating the next treaty again, rather than, okay, we've done this treaty, now let's give it 10, 20 years and see how it works out. You're trying to take something that has taken centuries, if not millennia, to grow into the shape it is now, and you're trying to fast forward it via, within the space of 1 or 2 lifetimes, to change it into something completely different, and that just will not work.
It's one of those things where I was, as I say, I was blissfully unaware when the referendum happened. I knew very little about the European Union until probably about perhaps 2.5 years ago. I did vote Remain, now a staunch leaver, just for anyone in the chat who wants to call me a traitor. And basically just looking at things like the history of the European Union, things like why it was formed, and not just that it was formed as an economic area, but sort of this general persistent lie, I suppose, that it was to promote peace in Europe. I mean, it was more to promote peace between France and Germany, right? And in the same way that reparations were paid to France, or were they, in order to kind of deal with the fact that the wars had happened.
To be honest, I really don't think it was ever sort of envisaged as something that creates peace. I think this is something one has now retrospectively interpreted onto it. I think at the time it was simply about trade.
I got this really, really irritating video that really riled me up on Facebook the other day, or Face Ache as it really should be called, where basically it was Brexit explained for Americans, and it was by I don't know, one of these stupid lefty kind of Facebook only podcast things. It was weird. I can't remember what it's called, but basically it was saying things like Britain has decided that it wants to separate itself from the single force for peace in Europe or whatever. And I'm just like, oh, for goodness sake, do you think we're just gonna without having a parliament where we can all talk to one another, the first thing that we're gonna do as soon as we don't have a trade deal with, say, I don't know, the German manufacturing industry, right? Let's say the German government stripped of the EU doesn't exist. As soon as the German government says, oh, we're gonna put a tariff on this or restrict this, we're gonna go, right, Well, we know how we solved this last century. I guess we better, load up the aircraft carriers and go to war. Like that just doesn't happen.
That's the only reason Napoleon ever marched on Moscow, wasn't it? Because there wasn't a European Union to prevent it.
Of course.
I mean, you look at this stuff and you just go, I'm sorry, but the whole thing was founded in the middle of the Cold War.
But I also
give them charitable interpretation. They essentially thought that one of the strategies was to bind Europe together so closely that Germany would be essentially trying to shoot itself in the foot to declare war again. So I can understand the strategy, but the notion that it actually keeps the peace now is laughable.
Well, yes, but you also have to understand that if that was the underlying thinking, then explain to me this. So the whole thing was actually founded in the Cold War. So this is a post-war creation. Now the Iron Curtain falls in the 90s, and then you have East Germany and West Germany, and now you're telling me that the entire goal by entire Western Europe was to found a union in order to prevent Germany from becoming too strong. So the first thing everybody agrees to is to unite Germany. That doesn't make any sense.
You're right on that score, but it made complete sense in terms of denying whatever emerged from the ashes of Russia any influence there.
Well, but do you understand what I mean? If the primary goal is to basically curtail Germany from becoming stronger, then why would one then engineer an even stronger Germany, which in population terms then begins to dwarf everybody else? It makes no sense whatsoever. At the same time, you then begin expanding the European Union eastwards. And this is something that has long since been forgotten. But way back when, in the days I remember, one of the main beneficiaries of the European Union in purely geographical terms was France. So we know because of the farming subsidies and whatever, they were great beneficiaries, but forget all that for a moment and think where France was in relation to all the other members of the then European Union. By expanding the whole thing eastwards, who is in the center of it now?
Germany,
precisely. So do you understand what I mean? Well, if this whole thing is there to curtail the Germans, then the project wasn't really very well handled, was it?
Well, no.
It depends if your view was to lock them so tightly in that they would be essentially trying to stab themselves by attacking another country, or it depends whether the project was to deny them influence. I don't think they were trying to deny them influence. I think they were trying to bind it very tightly so it wouldn't attack itself because the interests were the same.
Well,
but either way, it's failed. I agree.
I agree that has been French doctrine ever since the Second World War.
I think it's been a few other countries.
I really don't think that it is something. It is basically something that the rest of the European continent has bought into. I think everybody has kind of stumbled into this thing accidentally.
Zersetzor in chat does point out there was massive opposition to German reunification with the other European powers. Kohl was forced to agree to the euro in order to get it. The euro was meant to keep united Germany down.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
I remember that way back when. I don't remember that being stipulated as a condition, the euro, honestly.
Were you somewhere else in the world at the time?
I was somewhere else in the world.
You weren't overseeing that particular treaty.
If I would have written it, trust me, it would have been different. No, I was dead against. I was at the time dead against German reunification, and I feel myself fairly well confirmed with the way things have developed. I was against German unification. I was also against the expansion of the EU into Eastern Europe at the pace one was going. I think everything has been handled absolutely abominably. And in all fairness, the British have to take part of the responsibility for that. because it was, I think, under John Major that great steps were taken to bring in a great many East European countries. And when you actually look how previously kind of, countries were taken into the European Union fairly piecemeal, and then one suddenly just brought them in by the bucket load, you just felt, this was beyond the capacity of a union like that to be able to assimilate these things, if you know what I mean.
Just going to read a question from chat to Britisher. The real question is, what do you think the Romans would make of the German dominance of the EU?
Oh, they would immediately summon their legions. Actually, it's funny that we're talking about Rome here, because here's a wonderful segue. I think people will be deeply impressed, because I remember years ago reading a book by one Boris Johnson called
He can
The
write.
Dream of Rome. Boris Johnson is actually quite a talented classicist. I remember seeing an interview with him once where he was kind of reminded that David Cameron had been to university, and he kind of chuckled and went, "Oh yes, politics." And no, in Boris Johnson's book, he kind of sets out the comparison that some people make between the Roman Empire and, in a way, the European Empire, so to speak, the EU. And in it, he kind of sees, he kind of sort of says, well, they're trying to build something similar, with the euro, and it's trying to give it a currency and so on. But what he always falls back on is people actually, felt loyal to Rome. It was something. Whereas Europe, just evinces loyalty from nobody.
Because it has no identity crafted around it. The Romans had a very good...
Also, Rome had Latin, whereas, the Europeans don't have a language.
If I'm wrong, British, this is your area, but wasn't it more a case very similar to the American concept, where anyone could become it? It was a set of values to some degree.
I mean, obviously in Rome everything moved much more slowly, so it may well be that you would hope to assure it so that your son could be a Roman, if you know what I mean, rather than you yourself, if you know what I mean. But
it's the same principle. You served your time, you paid your dues, you bought into the concept, and at some point you were it.
Yes, it was very much one of these things which kind of embraced the populations that it conquered, so to speak, and thereby kind of made them part of it. I think it's in the same book, The Dream of Rome, that Boris Johnson basically says that there are estimates as to how many workers one believes worked in the administration for the Roman Empire. It came to a few thousand at the most. And then he says, meanwhile, the administration of the municipality of Birmingham these days, and it's just it's a ridiculous multiple of that, if you know what I mean. And you kind of see, you get the point he's making. But no, it's an interesting book. And yes, it's called The Dream of Rome, but it's not just him being all classicist. It's him trying to draw parallels between Rome and Europe, and also trying to explain why those parallels don't quite work.
It's just like, when it comes to the way Europe is set up, aside from the fact that it's kind of weird in that despite the European Union being based in Brussels, it is not, they deny any nationalist sentiment, whilst obviously being quite nationalist themselves. So it's kind of a guess of, like, the Romans, for instance, were quite proudly Roman. It was their attempt to convert people to Roman, whereas the European Union wants to convert people to European, and that's such a diverse, I guess, kind of fractured set of nationalities that it doesn't quite work in the same way. When it comes to the German dominance of Europe, of course, it's kind of like just simply due to Germany's placement. It's kind of inevitable that would happen. So I don't know, like, I don't know where the European Union goes from this, because at a certain point it needs to the borders within the European Union certainly in the Schengen zone, right? Like, don't exist in terms of for citizens. And I wonder at what point they will dissolve even further, and whether or not we'll just have the continent of Europa is now a nation Europa, you know.
Well, that's where I really have my doubts that you can do it, because I think that the nations of the European continent are proudly nationalist.
Oh, I certainly think that's the case for
I cannot see the Italians anytime soon abandoning their feeling superior because they're Italian. Do you understand what I mean? There are very, very strong individual cultures on that continent, and the idea of trying to somehow mulch them all together, it's just not going to work.
No, and to a degree, the European Union has managed to avoid, a lot of physical conflict, partially by importing voters, but also by, of course, maintaining the illusion of democracy with the European Parliament, which obviously serves two purposes. One is to pretend that there is democracy in the European Union, and the second is to provide a massive incentive for politicians to be pro-EU, so that they can get a cushy EU position once that's like on two times. I think it is I mean, it's about 150k a year pounds.
It also, of course, provides that wonderful sort of political buffer, which the same thing is now provided internally in the UK. So it goes without saying that I was also against the Scottish Parliament, but when it comes to the European Parliament and the whole European, structure. It provides a wonderful excuse for national governments to be able to blame the EU, and for the EU to be able to blame national governments.
Oh, of course.
So when you say there is no democracy, well, there is democracy, but there is complete abrogation of responsibility on all sides.
I mean, no. It is a complete illusion of democracy. I mean, if you look at what the Parliament can actually do. It is.
Yes, but in a way, one of the reasons one is curtailing democracy within the structure of the EU is in order to protect the democracies in the nation states. Because if you basically give them full democracy, you therefore give them a full mandate, and if you give them a full mandate, then they dwarf the democracies of the individual states, and then complete dominance from Brussels is inevitable. It's the same thing. If you have the president of the Commission, if you have Jean-Claude Juncker's post, if you make that electable by the people in order to make it democratically accountable, then he 24 hours later is the equivalent of the president of the United States. Because no government, no head of government would be able to challenge him, because he has a much greater mandate than anybody else, and it's democratic.
Yes, and I'm not saying that was. I mean, that's not what I want.
What I mean is that there are reasons why the structure is designed in that way. The problem is that it's flawed. That you simply can't gel these things together. You can have the nation state, or you can have the European Parliament and the European nation. You can't have the two things side by side each other.
Yeah, I understand that. It's just that it doesn't work.
No, I agree. I completely agree. I mean, in that regard, I was, it made me chuckle when you mentioned Brussels before, because I suddenly remembered that, of course, it's Brussels is an old city in a non-state.
Yes.
Because Belgium was invented.
Of course.
And the one symbol that Brussels has, because again, it's a provincial city in a non-state. So the one actual landmark that anybody could point to in Brussels is a little boy pissing into a bowl.
Yes.
And in a way, could there be a better symbol?
It's quite accurate. It's quite apt. I tell you what, I'll let's put a buffer here before we come back to sort of home territory rather than just general European gripes that we have. And I'll finish the super chats that we have at the moment. So Tim Cornish donates $5 and says, "My apologies. Hard to keep with the rules of engagement," referring to putting the N word in his previous super chat. Thank you. It was just a little bit of a joke, man. I don't think I've ever had a super chat sucked away from me, although I did look into it once or twice, but I don't think that would get it done. The Mad Mercenary donates $5 Thank you very much, and says, "The UK government denied Iranian Christians asylum by saying Christianity is a violent religion." I believe they said that Christianity is not a religion of peace, or a peaceful religion, which is what the Iranian was claiming.
Yeah, I saw that story, but I'm not. It felt, to me, it felt that some of the context was more than likely not being mentioned there, if you know what I mean. So I'm not sure I quite believe that sort of out of hand. I think it was Breitbart that reported on that, wasn't it?
Well, there's some stuff, but like the Daily Mail has reported on this as well, because there's been a second case, right, of the same thing happening. So the UK denied. Let me see. So church leaders are lambasting a letter from the UK government department questioning the religious beliefs of an Iranian Christian asylum seeker. Asylum caseworker Nathan Stevens published the letter received by the Iranian national in 2016, but it's only just coming up. Basically, the Home Office pulled several verses from the Bible, which it said showed that Christianity was neither peaceful, including verses from Exodus, Leviticus, and Revelation, saying these examples are inconsistent with your claim that you converted to Christianity after discovering it's a peaceable religion as opposed to Islam, which contains violence and rage, which is the statement which the asylum claimant made. So, to claim asylum in the UK, you must have a well-founded fear of persecution on account of ethnicity, religion, political opinion.
Can I ask the person who the person who wrote that on behalf of the Home Office? Was he by any chance called Mohammed?
That's the theory.
That's sort of what I was wondering, really.
The theory is that, but it hasn't been confirmed, and I don't want to kind of speculate.
But here's my problem with it. I don't have a problem if you want to take the view that religious grounds, it's not ideal because people do get killed for religious reasons.
Well, it's like if
from that standard consistently, I don't have that problem. But that's my point: is can you imagine the outrage if you flip the tables on that?
Yeah, that's very true. The apostasy law is what he's getting away from. So the idea is that you leave Islam, you get killed. So it's very. That's the thing. But another case has been revealed. So says the Daily Mail.
Just to sort of say, you leave Islam and you get killed, unless it is that you're converting to feminism. That's completely different.
That's a very particular religion that we're not allowed to criticize. So if you mind shutting your mouth, Britisher. So here we have the Daily Mail. Which is obviously so reputable, but obviously let's go here. The Home Office is facing more questions about its attitude towards Christian asylum seekers amid claims it rejected an Iranian woman's application by telling her belief in Jesus was half-hearted. It turned out that so it's explaining the first case, and now it's saying the caseworker Nathan Stevens, who has revealed another case, saying you affirmed in your AIR, so it's your asylum request, that Jesus is your savior, and then claimed he was not able to save you from the Iranian regime. It is therefore considered that you have no conviction in your faith, and your belief in Jesus is half-hearted. I have no idea, but it looks like what it's actually coming up with, this particular inquiry, is that the kind of the asylum office is finding any excuse it can to deny asylum claims at all. but people just don't know more about kind of what the caseworkers are doing, and there's no transparency on this. There appears to also be very little in terms of guidance. It's just like, oh, you're an asylum caseworker, assess it according to your best judgment, from what I can tell. So that's...
Well, I think a lot of it will kind of depend, because I think we also have to say that there could indeed be good reason for these asylum claims to be rejected, because if they have the feeling,
well, they could, but
if they get the feeling that somebody is pretending to be some kind of religious convert and that it's in fact not true, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, obviously.
And they may well ask them a few questions at an interview, and they know absolutely nothing about Christianity. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
You can then sort of understand why one might send a letter out saying, look, we don't really believe that you actually, believe in this. I think you're basically telling us a blatant lie, and no sooner that we would give you asylum, 24 hours later you would be in the local mosque. So it could well be that there could be perfectly good reason for this.
You have to take the devil's advocate position, don't you, British?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think this is the case. I just think it's all a bit smart aleck. It's a kind of a very smarmy way, as opposed to going, we don't believe that your conversion is true, is different to your faith is half-hearted because you're in fear of your life and you don't think that your faith leader can get you out of this. No, I just don't think that's. I think there's no need for the sass. I think that you can make a stronger case if you actually have the evidence, even if it's based on a character judgment, right? Based on actions taken rather than just you don't seem particularly faithful, do you?
Suggest me, or is that slightly witch trial-esque proof?
Yeah, exactly. It's just a bit it's dodgy, yes. Anyway, Christian Verti has donated €2. It's always nice to have some European currency under my belt. It won't be around for much longer.
It's also rather ironic that the next person to be read out as a super chat is called Christian.
Yes, of course. And he says, if you want a Borg, look at China. So there's that. Salad Fork has donated $5 Canadian. I tell you, getting them from all over the globe at this point. Thank you, Salad Fork. And says, what I don't understand is how Eurocrats can think they can keep Muslim masses in line. They won't consent to be ruled by the kafir for long. This is something which, interestingly, if you're familiar with a channel called V, he points out
also known as Alexander the Meerkat.
Alexander the Meerkat.
Or
yes.
if you're not being very polite, the Gypsy.
Yes,
there is that. Yes,
he embraces it. He has a very good video on this, talking about how the Romanian government dealt with Muslim immigration and the way in which Muslim faith leaders were allowed into the country and how. And they seem to be doing it, as much as their government fails to do a lot. This seems to be one thing where they seem to have quite a good policy on how to keep things going.
Well, there is a reverse policy, isn't there, of the European army? You go, well, you might need one sooner or later. Just saying.
And Dr. Martin Luther Pepe has donated 20 SEK, saying, let me guess, the bureaucracy was Byzantine. I presume that's related to your anecdote earlier about Boris Johnson and his
dream of Rome. Yes,
the dream of Rome. And all that.
I have to ask, what the fuck is a SEK?
It's Swedish krona, so as far as I'm aware.
So monopoly money then.
Unless I get roasted after.
It's a very dry currency.
Just stop it. There we go. There is obviously earlier this week. Did you hear about the Remain march that happened in London earlier this week, which has apparently been making a lot of.
Who's not being told about the Remain march by the people who want to tell everybody about it?
That's fair enough. This whole thing, it's the biggest. I like how it's people were saying you either get this, it's the biggest ever demo, right, from rags like The Guardian here, or you get one of the biggest because no one can estimate the size of the crowd and they're not sure whether or not the protest against the Iraq war was larger. And then there's people going, I bet it was 100,000, and other people going, it was 1 million. And I've attended a number of protests in the last couple of years, and I've also covered a number of them on the channel. Things like when they did the Trump baby thing, and when Owen Jones went and did his big protest, which he claimed was 250,000, and the reports emerged that it was between 20 and 25,000 in reality. And I just don't trust a single number that comes out about how many people attend these things. Like, I have no doubt that it was an enormous demonstration, because this was the big one. I mean, even every single DLR and tube station in London appears to have this. It appeared to have a poster for this Remain demonstration on it for the last sort of 3 weeks or so. There's clearly a lot of big money going into it to make it happen, and
I can believe there were 500,000 on it.
And I can easily believe there were 500,000 on it. But I mean,
I see your tweet earlier, Britisher, about Campbell.
Can I just briefly, because the irate bear is keeping me updated on Twitter once in a while, and the match between Montenegro and England at the football is presently Montenegro 1, England 5.
Marvellous.
Yeah, moving on.
So back to this protest. So it says, in one of the biggest demonstrations in British history, a crowd estimated to be over 1 million people. I mean, again, like all these photos, I mean, this is a video, but it's like all these photos and so on are always quite disingenuous, because you can always, that was enormously loud in my headphones. You'd be glad you didn't hear that one.
Actually, we could hear that.
Oh my goodness.
It was that loud in your headphones, we could hear.
But they basically, you can take photos from any angle and make a protest look much larger than it is.
Well, actually, that's sort of a giveaway. I think it was pretty much something the Liberal Democrats invented, and it's something worth looking out for. Whenever you see some kind of, some kind of event where the Prime Minister arrives somewhere and the local party greets him or her, and the local MP is there to shake hands, you will find there are a lot of party activists standing there holding up placards above their heads.
Yes.
And what it is it blots out the empty spaces in the photograph,
yes,
and therefore creates the impression of a much more jumbled, kind of packed crowd being there. So in fact, you can have the Prime Minister being greeted by 25 people, which would look pitiful, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
But because they're all holding these placards up and whatever, and of course the camera zooms in tightly, it looks like a sort of a massive packed event. And I think it was something the Lib Dems invented some, 30 years ago or so, because of course they had so few people. So if the Prime Minister, Labour or Tory would turn up somewhere, he could count on 1,000 or 2,000 people turning up. Whereas if Paddy Ashdown turned up somewhere, he'd be lucky if he got 12. So they needed to find a way of doing it for their photographs, and they kind of invented it. But if you look, you will see that by now the other two have also embraced it, because by now when they go somewhere,
they're so unpopular.
They're so unpopular they can't rouse the numbers anymore.
I mean, you just have to look at what was it? Corbyn Fest, was it? Like Labour Live, when they were trying to make the crowds look bigger than they were, and it was just like these huge gulfs. They couldn't do it. It was just there were these huge gulfs of space.
The most cringeworthy thing when it comes to these events that I can even recall was actually with what was he called? Ed Miliband, where Labour were clearly staging it. So whenever Miliband got off the bus, the campaign bus during the election campaign, there would be 20-something women desperate to get selfies with him, because of course he was such a sex god.
Obviously, yeah.
And you just thought, really, we are to believe this? And the BBC kind of reported on this straight, as in, oh, well, once again, they're there, all wanting their photo with him. And he went, seriously, you are expecting us to believe this?
By that logic, Wallace and Gromit is a fucking porn movie. Just saying.
See, here's like a shot, right, which is obviously there, which brings me into question of like the actual numbers. Can you see all the space in the back of this crowd here as they walk along? Like there's plenty of people, but like look here. This enormous gaps that are going on, and suddenly it cuts away. Obviously they may have finished.
The angles are very suspicious, in that the angles are very quick cuts. They're all low angles. Then there's no wide low pans, which would give you a sense of the real numbers.
But it's also like I've seen the helicopter shots of things like the Iraq War March, where it is literally jam packed through the city. And
the biggest space between people on that march is maybe 2 feet.
Yeah,
well, but, that said, we have seen helicopter shots of this too, and there have been a lot of people there.
Certainly.
Like I said, I can believe there's 500,000 from this helicopter shots. There's no fucking way it was 1 to 2 million.
I too am somewhat in doubt of the million claim, but it was definitely in the hundreds of thousands. And I think we have to kind of accept, once you get past hundreds of thousands, it becomes very difficult to estimate what figure you're actually looking at.
Mark on Twitter which says, that's great. Call us when it becomes 17.4 million.
Generally, yes. It's like why?
A lot of rage.
In fact, going back to the petition thing.
Can I just quickly, when it comes to the march, because when it comes to that march, one also has to consider that this is in London, the biggest city in Britain, where overwhelmingly, I know there is actually, I think, 1/3 of London voted to remain, but nonetheless, that actually it should be fairly easy in London to get 1 million people out, if you know what I mean. So it's much harder to bring people from Sunderland and Stoke-on-Trent to London to have a massive demonstration.
People have to work,
Well, yes, but as I say, that becomes even more the case if they have to travel down to London and then travel back. So when it comes to having a huge demo in London, the Remain campaign has a massive advantage, because that is pretty much where kind of the biggest concentration of their voters actually resides.
I just also point out that Daughter of Albion is in the chat, and later than Bristol Palin's period.
And what?
Later than Bristol Palin's period. I didn't think this was a complex joke.
Strong. Discordia and Daughter of Albion both in chat. Unfortunately, Daughter of Albion's internet's broken, but so she's on data, and that's why she can't join us. But she is listening in, and I'm sure she'll interject from chat. As for Discordia, she's not welcome, just because she's Scottish, and I don't like Scots very much. That's a joke, and she can come on if she wants. Speaking back to this kind of thing which has been going on in general with this petition, is they've been contrasting it with the Leave with No Deal petition, which was up, which I think got something like 350,000 signatures on it. And of course they're going, oh, this is a clear demonstration of like the superiority of the Remainers. We've got nearly 6 million votes on this, or as they call it. They always seem to refer to it as votes instead of signatures. They've got 6 million signatures, and they could only muster up 350,000. I think they're forgetting the fact that, like, if things are still on track, and we end up, like, a lot of Leavers in particular just believe so strongly in the incompetence of our government that they believe that, we really won't come to anything by the 12th of April, which is obviously when this new kind of European extension is really going to. And because we won't really come to anything, we'll just end up flopping out of the EU just by sheer bureaucratic nonsense anyway by that date. So there's really no reason for them to sign it. Like, as far as they're going, like, things are ticking over anyway, until it goes to it. Do you agree?
Yes, I think the whole thing. Someone was pointing out in the chat earlier that May is trying to extend it via international treaty, not statute law. I think they're missing the point as to everything about whether it's legal or illegal mechanism. The point is you're effectively pissing on democracy every time you discuss this, not you, but every time you politicians discuss it. It doesn't matter if you get a petition for 500,000. If you want an approach where mob rules, essentially, and enough screaming can overturn a vote, fine. We'll all sign up to those rules. But if that's what you have, don't complain when it's applied to you and we get our own version of a less nice Trump. Hitchens made that point, didn't he, recently? And I totally agree.
I believe so.
I think also
disregard this, we'll get our own Bolsonaro.
I think also there shouldn't be any votes in Parliament as of now, particularly not this week, because I think, I don't know about you, but I feel the population has changed its mind by now since it voted for those particular MPs. So we should have a petition, basically, to have another general election.
Yeah, obviously.
Because, yeah, I mean, just because it's 2.5 years ago since we had the... well, no, it's not.
In fact,
not
we should have a general election every month. To be perfectly honest.
just to make sure that the people haven't changed their minds. Yes,
I have got a nice little idea. I don't know if anyone's already done it. List of every single Remainer MP and say, well, since you want to, re-ask the public about democracy, we, the undersigned, declare that we would like a fresh by-election in your constituencies.
Yep, no problem with that.
Yep. Including PewDiePie to pump it.
Here is the claim of 1 million people on the People's Vote March, which has been linked to me in chat by, forgive me, it's by Jury Rigging, who says an estimated 1 million people marched on the 23rd, and crowd estimation experts put it at between 312 and 400,000. So there you go. Which seems a lot more reasonable to me. Sort of between. I'm surprised it's that low, to be honest. I thought it would be closer to sort of 500,000 to 600,000, but that sounds about right. Just in general, and there we go. So apparently, let's see what we've got here. There. Oh yeah, like Burko is saying that he wouldn't allow another vote on the deal. What happened with that? Do you remember?
Well, that's what nobody knows. I mean. We've now got Theresa May talking about whether she wants to bring a deal back or not. But in fact, as far as I understand, Burko's ruling still stands. It has to be substantially different. Now, unless he allows the fact that the date has changed to be a substantial difference, I don't know. At the same time, of course, also keep in mind that we've now already had a vote on whether to have a second referendum or not. And how would you substantially change that if one were to want to bring it back, if you know what I mean? Because, yes, I mean, Burko's ruling effectively means, unless you've changed something, don't come back with it. And particularly, he said it needs to be substantially different. So it's not just enough to have some detail. So the question is, if you now have the delay and whatever, and therefore all the dates change, is that sufficiently different?
The chat is saying that Burko saying he would allow a vote if the majority of Parliament want him to make an exception, and also that they were speculating an extension might count it as different enough circumstances for him to do it. But I just have no idea. They're voting apparently on the amendments from 10 o'clock tonight, apparently. So Corbyn wants to... I have no idea what he's saying here.
Abolish capitalism, execute everyone who earns more than £100 a week, and worship at Karl Marx's grave.
I mean, he would, but he's too busy. I mean, he's got to clean it first, if you remember.
Well, and, you can't be at Hamas funerals and there at the same time, can you? Basically,
this is a load of gumph here that basically says, make all necessary preparations for a second referendum, and stuff like that, which I just don't think is particularly interesting or means anything at all. Although there is the thing which is interesting is there is going to be the Leavers protest march on the 29th. I think there's two of them going on. There's like the big one, and then there's a UKIP specific one in Whitehall that's going ahead. Are you coming down for protest, actually, Binary? Because I know you were incensed the other week looking to demonstrate.
I was going to. I think I'm going to wait and see what they do now. I'm going to save my anger. I'm pissed off anyway that they were extending it, but I think I'm going to wait and see what the final answer. If we leave with no deal still, then fine. I won't go off the deep end. I think that's where a lot of people are in terms of their mood. They're going to wait and see what the extension brings. But if the answer is May's shitty deal being rammed through, then all bets are off. Get your yellow vests out.
I think as chat...
Did I ever tell you I did that, by the way?
No, I don't think so.
So I went and got a pair of yellow vests and sent one to my local MP saying, choose. Out on it.
Sassy Binary coming in there. I think...
well, she's an ardent Remainer, so...
Yeah, you got to be like a little bit... I wouldn't even vest you, Binary. That's what it is. But the... I will be attending the Whitehall March, at least. I'm going to try and get the whole day off and basically attend the main one as well. But I will be out and about if anyone's around and going to join me. And that's the general thing. But other than that, I think we're in that weird kind of limbo period now where, apart from the fact that everyone is Brexit fatigued to all hell and back, that's going to be the kind of cut-off date. I am curious what's going to happen. I don't think that I think purely due to the fact that people are so sick of this, but they're not sick of it in an angry kind of way. They're sick of it. A lot of them are sick of it in a kind of, oh God, when it please just happen already kind of way. We want anything else to be going through the news. I don't think we're going to have much chance of, say, riots or violence or anything like that at the moment, but I do think that the next week and a half is going to be very interesting to see in terms of like what might actually happen. Do you not think?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on whether May continues to survive, and I'm not so sure she. Yeah, can't speak. I'm not sure she's so much surviving as no one else wants the job at the moment.
No, although there's been talk of Gove making another play.
Wormtongue himself.
Well, when it comes to not wanting to make a play, I think it's just basically this good old fashioned Tory hypocrisy. Have either of you seen the last episode of Yes Minister, when he actually when he basically becomes Prime Minister? And basically Sir Humphrey gives him instructions on how to dodge questions. So whenever he's asked whether he's interested in the leadership, he will always sort of say that, his children are now grown up and he thinks it is perhaps time that he should be spending more time with his wife. Although, of course, if he were pressed by his friends in Parliament, then perhaps he may be willing, reluctantly, to concede that he would take this role. So I think this is what we're sort of seeing with these with the cabinet politicians at the moment. It's bleedingly obvious that they all want to be Prime Minister, but they know that the Tory party is unforgiving when it comes to disloyalty. So everybody is hoping that somebody else becomes the stalking horse who actually, takes on May somehow.
Yeah,
and
so
then
they never
they are in a position then to throw their hat into the ring. Sorry?
Have they ever done that, British? Have they ever elected the one that's put themselves forward very vocally?
I don't believe so, but then I don't know that much about, Tory party history, as far as you can go back, if you know what I mean. But I know that the famous example that is always used is Michael Heseltine. Michael Heseltine is effectively seen as kind of, one of the big beasts of the Tory party who never became Prime Minister. And the reason that is because everybody held it against him that he had become the stalking horse against Margaret Thatcher.
Yes, I wonder how much of that is because they like having some degree of influence and control, and if you're the front runner, then you probably don't have as much control over them.
That's possible. But as I say, when it comes to the situation as we see it now, it's simply that none of them want to actually stand up and be the person to kind of speak out. And I mean, when you've got someone like Gove kind of standing there outside his house saying, this is a time for unity, where we all have to stand together, and the Prime Minister has my complete support. Does anybody believe that?
No.
But it's the sort of thing that he feels he must say because he must appear loyal.
Yeah,
So
of course. The Tory party is loyal first and foremost to itself in all but action.
Precisely.
Two things.
You've got this ludicrous situation where everybody has now been trapped in it because there isn't anybody who really thinks, well, I've not got a cat's chance in hell, so I might as well do everyone a favor and stand up and stab the beast, if you know what I mean, and then all the others can come in and actually make their bid. And because we don't have a person like that, who, perhaps a backbench MP who's thinking at the next general election he's going to retire anyway, just somebody do us the favor and stand up.
Somebody fall on the sword, yeah.
The main problem with that by now is, of course, also the constitutional issue in the Conservative Party, because they have challenged her recently, technically she is safe for another year. So unless pretty much the cabinet in unison tells her, you either resign or we all resign. Basically, you would find yourself in a position, as Corbyn did some time ago, where he couldn't fill all his shadow cabinet posts because that many Labour MPs were refusing to work with him. So if that happens on the Tory side, if the cabinet pretty much in unison says, we are not having it, you have to go. If it's just individuals who stand up, she can basically just sit back and go, well, they can't even challenge me for another year.
True. Two quick things. The word lickspittle perfectly describes Michael Gove.
Agreed. Yep.
Secondly, I've been thinking of that for a few minutes. I'm thinking, what word describes Michael Gove perfectly? And secondly, look in the sidebar. Sarah has just liked something on Twitter, which I happen to be checking, by our favourite mastermind.
I see.
Favorite mastermind contestant. Yes.
I will just fantastic video, by the way, Britisher. I will just
I like that video.
I will just weigh in on your kind of ultimatum between MPs and May sort of thing, Brit, where it's kind of like who is it? Jenny Chapman, the shadow Brexit minister, has called on MPs about 7 minutes ago to take the reins from the hands of the Prime Minister. There's a void where coherent leadership ought to be, she says. Parliament should step into the void. And I couldn't agree more, although I don't think what she means is what I mean.
a large drop and a sharp stop, yes?
Yes, it's just there.
Yes, I am just reading Mastermind's tweet here. This is quite unreal.
Yep, he's properly losing the plot now, isn't he? It's brilliant.
Yes, Ku Klux Klan. Yes.
Let me just
17.4 million Ku Klux Klan members. Yes, obviously.
Obviously, there's us. Here we are. The United Kingdom is currently being held to ransom by a bunch of wild-eyed, hard Brexiteers. You know, the people following the will of the people, who have inherited the name used by the heads of the Ku Klux Klan. Wake me up when this nightmare ends. I just don't want to wake him up ever. Do you know what? I wish he'd go back to his coffin and just rest for the remainder of eternity. But
no, now you're talking of Michael Howard.
So Laura Koonsberg, who's obviously the BBC correspondent, is saying the Grand Wizards is the new name for the Chequers day trippers. Apparently, had another meeting this morning when they were discussing whether or not they would get back on board to back May's deal, and there was no firm conclusion. Where on earth has this Grand Wizards come from, and who's calling them that? If they've decided to call themselves that, I mean, it's their job to be politically correct in that regard. You know, it's one of those things where you'd expect them to at least have some knowledge of
basic knowledge of American history. Would tell you probably don't call yourselves that, but
yeah, just in general, it's like The Grand Wizard. What on earth is there? A couple of insiders told me they're using the nickname informally. No intended connection to anything else.
I'm just going to say, you're a wizard, Jacob. No.
No. Oh, God, no. Oh dear. It appears to be. It's another "Are we the baddies?" moment. Oh my goodness! It's just the face palming. Oh my goodness! It's like I don't know.
I'm starting to think David Lammy may actually be a satire account rather than a real one.
Well, when we see Lavid Dammy, who happens to be that, I imagine it's great.
How do you lampoon that?
Well, one of the funniest things when it came to the David Lammy mastermind clip was one of the comments I got by someone who said, "Oh, this is great. Could you please make this a series?"
Oh God!
And you just go, yeah, you. How exactly?
Politicians who are well known have been on there.
How exactly do I do that?
Or Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? I know you have politicians go on there for their charities.
Oh dear! Fantastic video though. If you can make it a series, please do, Britisher.
Yes, yeah, I'll see what I can find. Whether Theresa May ever did us the pleasure of going on to Mastermind.
And on that rather Lammy-esque note, it is time to end for the evening. But I am just going to run through the last super chats before I get lambasted for not doing them. So Grey Cub has donated $5 and says, "Are you ready for gravity to stop working in the UK after Brexit?" Obviously, I'm more concerned about the super gonorrhea infested pugs, which are going to be roaming the countryside.
Now, come on, it's the super gonorrhea infested Nazi pugs. Get it right.
Of course, got to add that in there. Obviously, being reined in by their rabid owners, who are obviously using them to drive the Polish and the Indians and all the other racial minorities out of the nation.
Did you see Dankula did another short pug video?
I have not, but
This was the Black Power, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Oh my goodness!
He said something on the lines of "Round 2 Electric Boogaloo."
I'll have to see. Dr. Martin Luther Pepe, another 20 sec, and says, "How large will the mob be if they cancel Brexit?" If they cancel Brexit, I genuinely believe we'll have civil war, but I don't see that sort of happening.
We're not going to have civil war, no. But I could very well imagine civil unrest.
Yeah, I think you'll have small scale kind of clashes. Nothing.
Well, I mean, you think it'll be small scale clashes until someone decides they're going to assassinate someone, and then it'll become very much an identity politics game, and then it'll turn into something far worse. That's what I see happening.
I'm surprised something like that hasn't happened since Cox, actually.
Exactly.
You just need to look back, for something, the likes of which that could happen. We could have something like the poll tax riots.
Yeah, I mean, we could have something along the lines of what's happening in France right now over here, to be honest.
I was reading about that, actually. They seem to be using almost military tactics and level of diversion with the police. I was reading about how they use decoy groups to lure the police away, then the real rioters do something else nearby and all the rest of it.
There was also a funny thing where the Gilets jaunes were putting the cameras exclusively in the hands of women because the police were less likely to attack them, and the police responded by beating the women. So that was that.
The police being, really, really embracing that touch.
Not ideal.
People have lost eyes or something like that.
Oh, there was this nasty one, and someone died. Like this old woman, like they fired a gas canister, and it deflected into the building through the blinds or something, and she was quite frail and elderly, and she died from shock or something. So that wasn't great. Obviously, there's all the property damage and the burning cars as well. Finally, then,
aside from the loss of tourism dollars, I mean, I can't really imagine too many tourists heading to the city of love right now. You tear gas.
You say that, but the lack of coverage from the general media over the last sort of month or so. I've had people who came up to me the other day and were like, "Oh, we're planning on going over to France, to Paris or whatever in the next sort of month. Do you want to come along?" And I was just like, "Do you know know what's going on over there at the moment.
They will be losing money. I mean, the business I work for was under a travel advisory, and the travel advisory is come back on a Thursday night. Do not go back before a Monday.
Chat are telling me, unsubstantiated, but I will choose to believe them, that 15 eyes have been lost and 7 people have died so far.
With 19 weeks of rioting, I can believe that.
I can believe that. And finally, then, JS has donated £2. So thank you very much, and says, "No deal is 3-1. Good bet as it's the default position?" ? I'm not putting any bets on anything at this point. I just have absolutely no idea which way it's going to go. My gut feeling is we're going to flop out just due to bureaucratic incompetence. But
that's the thing that makes me angry, though, not so this. It's not that we are probably still going to get that outcome. It's that we've only arrived at that by incompetence.
Yes, that does make me very
That's what pisses me off. Like, okay, we're here, but we've got here completely by fucking chance. You've done everything you can to subvert the process, so...
Absolutely. And on that definitive statement, it is time to end. So thank you everyone very much for joining me. And thank you very much to my guest, Binary Surfer. Thank you for joining me.
No problem.
And thank you very much, as always, to the Britisher for...
It's been an honour and a privilege as ever.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone in the chat. Have a great week and good night.
Toodle pip.